Hey, welcome back. My name is Alexandra Allred, and I am with the Department of Kinesiology at Tarleton State University. We're covering chapters 14 through 16 in the book When Women Stood. And that book is coming out in March 2023. And so a lot of the stuff that we're going to go over, I'm really whizzing through because in the classes that I'm currently teaching, I give them the reading material that they need. But if you're new, or you're not even a member, you're not even a student at Tarleton, welcome, and I hope you watch the whole series, because really and truly, women's sports history is like no other, and it is just incredible, and there are so many amazing women. This section that we're on is the recognized, that's an important word, the recognized entry of lesbians into sport and the closing of the 20th century, and talking about abuse that is a part of women's sports, which is a sad fact. So, right from the beginning, as women were being allowed into sports, then the next thing that was really important for media is to really make sure that women stayed in their place in sport, which were the approved tennis, croquet, tennis, sometimes swimming. That was still debated among many people. And then, of course, gymnastics and dance. And even then, it wasn't anything wild or crazy. And so as women, however, were getting more and more interested in sports, and we already covered World War II with a league of their own. Women were getting into baseball, and women were trying to get into things outside the box that they had been given. They were accused of being lesbians. They were mannish. They were butch. They were all of these things. And the name calling was important to keep women from doing that. But as women were getting more and more sports, they started ignoring that. They didn't care. It didn't matter to them because they were with their teammates and they were loving what they were doing. But some of the things that we saw, will playing fields one day be ruled by Amazons? And so going back to the first time we met and we were entering this book, and I talked about Amazons, is even by the Greeks, Amazons, mannish. They were man haters, and they were lesbians, and it was so important to always make sure that we kept our women looking a certain way. I'll move this over so that you can see that even by 1955, Ebony magazine was warning women that they didn't want to look like men. They didn't want to get too masculine. And definitely, if you stayed in sports too long, you might become an Amazon, and that you become a man eater. It's with the passage of Title IX in 1972, then there was the big fear that homosexuals were going to be all over college campuses because they were going to be infiltrating all these women's sports that were now coming up. Well, first of all, I always say to people, I have news for you. There were already homosexuals all over college campuses, and they have been since the beginning of time. And I know this makes a lot of people uncomfortable, but as we go through history, we see that there have always been recordings of transgender, their third gender, homosexuals. This isn't new in history. This goes all the way back to Egyptian times. So, but the big thing that happened is that we were so very, very worried about, we were always talking about the lesbians. And while we certainly didn't talk about gay men, the lesbians was a very talked about topic because that did not work well with the patriarchal systems at all. And if you have women in love with other women, then they weren't going to marry men and they weren't going to procreate. And so this was always a really big deal. And so it became all the more important to really highlight our feminine females. And so, I'll give you a perfect example. Moving me again. I don't want to cover up the lovely Anna Kournikova. So in tennis, for example, on the right, I've got the arrow, but that's Martina Navratilova, honestly, one of the biggest names in tennis even today. And she wasn't shy about it. I mean, she came out very early in her career, and everyone knew that she was a lesbian as a result. There were many places that she couldn't travel because lesbianism was considered a crime in many countries. And so there was always a fear if she traveled, what would happen to her. But one of the biggest things we saw was how important it was for women who were lesbians to stay quiet about it, because it was an economic decision. And so on the left, Mandikalova made no bones about telling reporters it was like playing against a man and how powerful Martina was. And years later she came out and it turned out she was also gay, but she was so afraid of what it would do for her economically to come out. And so there's always been that thing. And then meanwhile, Anna Kournikova, who's been called the best or worst thing that's ever happened to this because she never won any Grand Slams. She was just an average player at best, but off the court, she made over $10 million. I don't think I need to tell you why. She was one of the most popular players from court. And so what the message that female athletes got is you've either got to be drop dead gorgeous and sell the sexuality, or if you're gay, you need to be quiet about it. And the WNBA, even though they knew that their fan base, they had a huge gay fan base, and they knew that they had a lot of gay players, they wouldn't talk about it. It was something, and then when they were asked or questioned by reporters, they'd even say things like, we're not aware of that, we don't keep those kind of statistics. Even though they were very aware of who their fans were and who their players were. And so historically, lesbians have been both active and instrumental in the women's movement. But again, the same thing is they learned very quickly that they needed to stay quiet about if they were gay. And then even in as much work as they did, they were even punished by early suffragists. And this can't be a surprise. We saw this with Susan B. Anthony and her racist views against Frederick Douglass and any black men getting the vote before her. And so this isn't new. Historically, lesbians have, as I said, this goes back to Egyptian times. This goes back to Greek times. They're not new to us, but it's new when we start talking about changing the feminine ideal. That was incredibly threatening. So coming into the closing of the 20th century, the beauty thing persists because, I'll switch this. There was the constant body shaming. It was important that women always be beautiful, but then they always risked stalkers. And there was one article that I was reading, and they were naming the top women who were stalked. And even the author said, of course she'd be stalked. She's drop dead gorgeous. And so we are not even aware of our own language when we talk about that this is the burden that women are to bear for being beautiful. And oh, by the way, you need to be beautiful if you want to be successful. And so I'll let you see that the number of athletes who made sure that people knew that they were married, or made sure that everybody understood that they were feminine and they liked men. And this has always been important. Again, the why question is because over time, we've never thought to add, it's never been important to us if men were married, or if men had a fiance, or if men planned on having children. That was never, ever part of the questions after a great game or a great match. So that leads nicely into what women look like. It's also the size. And one of the struggles that the WNBA has had is they don't meet that ideal because they're large, they're tall, they have big bones, they have big feet. And it doesn't matter if they're beautiful. Lisa Leslie was a wildly successful model and she's gorgeous, but because they don't meet that ideal, the NBA has always struggled more in popularity than gymnasts and ice skaters and soccer players. And so the size thing, the history is really important on this one. I'm going to move me around because you just got to see this. So you know vanity sizing. But take a look at the chart and look to see how much, and that, my bad. The average size for women rose from 16, to 18. A size 16 to size 18 in the United States. But the model stayed the same size as a 0. So American women are getting larger and think of young girls going through puberty. And now and I don't mean in terms of weight, but even just in size. And yet our models are still expected to stay a size 0. And so if you're only looking at a size 0 as the mark for beauty, but our sizes are going up, that sends such terrible messages to girls. So during World War II, they decided that they were going to get a standardized size of women. And so it was done by men. So it didn't occur to them that women have different size hips or legs or breasts. And so you can see the size model that they gave. A 31 bust, 24-inch waist, and 98 pounds. By 1983, the government obviously abandoned this effort, but now they left it to the private sector so they can come up with, you ever notice, for the ladies listening, the sizes differ greatly from store to store, whereas men's clothing sizes are consistently the same. But vanity sizing for women, they vary greatly from store to store because vanity sizing depends on the line that you like. It should be a lot better if you're 2 sizes smaller than you actually are. And then the stocking, and then the pants. And we're always talking about pants, right? And so I had to put a picture of her, Carol Moseley Braun, when she came into the U.S. Senate for the first time in 1993. And then I read a really funny interview with her, and she said, I thought I was looking good. And she came in and everybody was staring at her, and she figured it was because she looked so good. She did not get the memo that in 1993 it was still prohibited for women to wear pants on the floor of the U.S. Senate. Now, women wore pants in their own offices, but if they suddenly everyone had to rush for a vote or a hearing to get to the floor, they always had to dress in their offices and would quickly change into their dresses to go down to the floor. 1993, can you imagine this? And then still, of course, continues the debate on why does field hockey demand that girls and young women still wear skirts. I've talked to, I can't even tell you how many I've talked to, and there remains no answer. There's not a concrete answer. Historically, yes, it started in the 1800s with Appleby when she brought the sport to the United States, and of course she was wearing a dress, a long to the ground dress. But beyond that, there's no reason except for what most sports historians believe is that it upholds the idea that it's not a violent sport, even though there's a lot of contact, and so somehow it seems more permissible to allow girls in that sport if they're wearing a skirt. I'll let that be with you. We've made such great strides over time in the sports that we're in and the things that we can do and the mega million contracts that female athletes are getting, and we're seeing that they're economically feasible and extremely popular, more popular during the Olympics, female athletes are than men. And yet there are still so many problems that happen with female athletes. And so, of course, you are familiar with the scandal of Larry Nassar, not scandal, the crime. And we had athlete A, athlete B, gymnast 1, and gymnast 3. And they remained anonymous until they finally got the courage to, and that's not a judgmental statement, they went through a lot until they were finally willing to speak before a U.S. Senate Judiciary Committee to talk about the neglect that Larry Nassar, I'll move me so you can read this, is believed to have sexually assaulted, groomed, and abused more than 500 girls and young women, and not primarily in gymnastics, but predators or equal opportunists. And so any sport, if it was young, he would assault them. And I have a lot more details in the book, but it's pretty awful. He became so emboldened that he would actually do it in almost in crowded areas with a sheet underneath, but he would do it. It became his thrill, in which he was abusing these girls and doing horrific things. It's just so hard to talk about, but the athletes who came forward are Simone Biles, Ali Raisman, Maggie Nichols, and Michaela, of course. And she was famous during the memes at the Olympics of, the Michaela expression. And I've talked about this to a lot of gymnasts, about you wonder if what she was going through, and we know that all four of these women now have had PTSD, they've had emotional breakdowns. Of course, Simone Biles, the most famous at the last Olympic Games, and you wonder if a lot of what we saw was still we don't wonder, we know, is PTSD. You know, Simone Biles said to the FBI, you had just one job and you couldn't do it. And to give you an idea of why this was allowed to go on for so many years is when the FBI called Allie Raisman, one of the things she asked them is, what took you so long? And they said, oh, we're waiting for the Olympics to be over with. And because they realized that the pressure from the IOC and from USA Gymnastics and many other entities, that they knew that the money was so big that it was better to wait for the Olympic Games to be over with before they really launched into the investigation and arrest Larry Nassar and start shutting people down. And so, you know, many people have wondered how many other young girls and young women were molested in that time frame. And many careers were ruined, and a lot of people may not know or might be too young, but Dominique Monsios, she was a huge powerhouse in USA Gymnastics, and she was one of the first to speak out. And before she knew it, they were questioning her family life. They were calling her unstable. They were ridiculing her in any way that they could, and just to discredit her while they knew that molestation was still going on. And this lends to Rachel Denhollander is believed to be one of the first, and certainly the first that we know about, and she was the first to report it. She was just 7 years old when he assaulted her, and when she told her mega church in Texas, they didn't believe her. They didn't want to believe that this would be happening. And so the lesson for women who have been sexually assaulted over not the years, not the decades, but the centuries is it's too easy for people to not believe you, and then blame you for how you walked, how you talked, how you dressed. And so a lot stay very quiet and have let this pass. And so what came of this though is both of these women, Rachel Denhollander and also Nancy Hogshead Maker, they're both lawyers today, and they both are movers and shakers and helping with civil rights and women of abuse. And they were both raped. Denhollander when she was so young, but Nancy Hogshead was slated to be one of the greatest swimmers of our time, and she was always in the news, and she believes that one of the reasons that she was targeted and raped for hours is because it was someone who hated women, and he wanted to punish her because she was constantly in the news. As a result, she got one of the first scholarships at Duke University, which is fantastic, and they redshirted her and allowed her time to kind of come back to them and let sports save her. And so today, that's one of the things that she does. It's important to understand when we talk about rape that 4% of sexual assaults reported, only 4 have been proven false. And that's one of the great myths is they say a lot of people will use abuse as an excuse, and it's really quite rare. It's awful that anybody would use that, but it is quite rare. I'll give you a moment to kind of look at the slide here, some of the statistics. But the biggest jump out here is that it traditionally takes women and men upward to 20 years to come out with their story, and they suffer in silence, and they're just not ready, and they're afraid of the ridicule. And so that's one of the reasons that they stay so quiet. And we've seen this in politics, and we've seen this in Hollywood, and we've seen this in sports. And so came the Me Too movement. And so I put this in here because hashtags in women's sports has been really a big deal. And the Me Too movement, it didn't start with Alyssa Milano, an actress, but she's a big name. And so when she invited people to say Me Too, if you know what we're talking about here, that's when it exploded. But it really began with a social worker and an activist and an incredible woman, Burke, down here in the bottom. And she's the one who started it, but it just really didn't take traction. But then by 2016, we saw a lot of things in the news that were in which women were being abused and being ignored, and enough was enough. And it helped because it was sports that Hollywood and sports together, but it was the media. And so I've got kind of you had all these women that were coming out, me too, me too, me too. And a lot of people didn't like that, and they tried to do counter Me Too's because they just didn't like talking about women's hormones and the cycle. They didn't want to hear about it. And so they, instead of trying to believe it or understand it, they just shut it down. But at the same time that that's going on, look at some of the stuff that's still, these are relevant ads that we see, a woman tied to a shoe, a woman who's clearly a victim of a rape, another woman where there's men are looking down while she's being held down. And it's just, these are the kind of images that people think are, it's savvy or sexy advertising and gets people's attention, and certainly it does. But it also sends the wrong messages to both boys who somehow might walk away with the idea that this is okay, and certainly it's okay to objectify women, but for girls who have to kind of see this all the time. And it's another reason why a lot of times they just decide to just stay quiet about it, because this is normal, isn't it? Again, gaming. And so I put gaming in for esports because it's so important that you look at the statistics and you realize how very prevalent abuse against women is. And why am I beating this drum so much? It's because when we're talking about women in sports, we have to talk about the unequal treatment. And we can't expect that women are going to have equal treatment anywhere on the court, on the field, on the track, if this is going on in society. And so if we have these very conflicting ideas of what we think women are or what they should be and what they deserve, we can't expect better treatment in sports, right? Right. So the F word, feminism, which is such a hard word, which is, again, I know that I have students I've had side conversations with who talk about, I'm not a feminist or anything, but so we need to understand what feminism is. And feminism, the counter side did a great job of making feminism be about man-haters, and mannish lesbians, and they're grumpy and they're mean. What it's all about is just trying to get equal treatment. It's just about trying to get equal treatment. And so I made a list of just some of the stuff that when we talk about feminism, that this is why, is we're tired of the double standard, we're tired of the mistreatment, and so we're just simply asking for more of an equal platform, right? No better example is if we're talking about advertising and media, is the Pacific small island of Fiji. Never had TV before, and in 1994 they got television, and it was soon thereafter, for the first time, their females started obsessing over what they look like, their size, and dieting. And that came from advertising from Westerners. And so the last things, we are going to talk about the fourth wave that starts coming as we shut this one down. But I want to end it with some pictures again of just the difference on how we expect our females to dress, even in sport. We expect the same performance. We expect them to give everything they've got, but then we still want them to look differently. And the question is, why? Who is this for? And so really the last big picture I have on the right there is just that more than ever, you're seeing more female podcasters and YouTubers and TikTokers and female producers and directors in Hollywood who are trying to oversee the content to change, not what's already been done, we can't go back on that, but help change the image for boys and girls. And really, this book came about when I interviewed Christine Lilly from the U.S. women's soccer team. And she's a coach, and she was talking about why female coaches are so important, not just for girls, but for boys. And when boys can see a woman standing before them and be taken seriously, and they can respect her, right? Then that changes how that boy begins to see the female image as he grows into a man. So we'll end there and go with the next section. And I hope to see you soon. Thanks. Bye.